A new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. This is the words of Jesus Christ.
Thanks be to God.
Tom Dijkhuizen, who is helping us technically so beautifully with his creative gifts, told me a story recently that just so perfectly demonstrates what I want to try with my heart, not just with my words, communicate this evening as we gather for worship. When he was a pastor in Pennsylvania, in a small church, he had an honest disagreement with a member. Now, I know you're shocked that these things happen, but it was a serious, honest disagreement. And as a result, this couple left the church. As Tom describes it, he tried for a couple of months to reconcile, and nothing seemed to work. They just wanted to move on. And then Tom, as a pastor, experienced the Monday-Thursday service, not as a pastor, but as a worshiper, and was impressed the next morning because at that Monday-Thursday service, they had done a rebaptism ceremony where members of the congregation were called on to recommit themselves to their baptism. And for Tom, it was a very moving experience. And he describes it as the next morning, this couple's names were on his heart and mind. He couldn't get them out of his mind. And he thought to himself, oh, how I wish they had been there. And then Tom did something that is really quite remarkable, if you ask me. He would not say this. He went to their home. Because the next Sunday, of course, after Maundy, Thursday, is Easter Sunday. And he thought to himself, why couldn't we do this rebaptism on Easter morning? What an amazing demonstration that would be of the resurrection power of Jesus Christ. Because in a small church, you realize everyone knew. And so Tom went to their home and spoke with them, described to them what he experienced on Maundy, Thursday, and invited them to come Easter morning and have a rebaptism service. That's not the most surprising part. I know some of you are already thinking, where in the book of order is that book of worship? Let's see, we're going to have to check this out when we get home. The most amazing thing is that when it came time for that rebaptism during that Easter Sunday morning service, and they went up to the baptismal font, Tom got on his knees and allowed this couple to rebaptize him. Now, you can argue and debate that all night long if you want to. But that was a Christ moment. And he didn't have to explain it. Nobody had to say a thing. They knew exactly what had happened. Christ had shown love in a way that no one had ever seen, at least in that congregation before. I know what you're thinking, but what about, and then there's some issue, some problem. But what Jesus says in this text is so simple, not simplistic. There is a difference, you know. Jesus says, by this. And help me out here, what is the this? That you, say it with me, that you love one another. Not the that, but the this. That you love one another. By this will all men know. This is how, and it's interesting because Jesus has done this in the context of a most remarkable moment in his life, hasn't he? These are the final hours, and it's the last chance he has to talk to his followers before he leaves them. Don't you think he would have had a list? I think he had all sorts of that's on his mind. I would have had all sorts of that's on my mind. I would have said, don't forget that. Make sure you attend to that. And be sure you don't forget about that. Here is Jesus facing the agonizing abandonment of God the Father. He's already feeling the piercing nails and thorns. But does he sit them down and give them a talking to about the that's that they have to attend to? He says no. He says one thing. His final marching orders. This is how everyone will know. And you know he means not only his followers, but also all those who will come to know him through them. Remember the prayer. This isn't just about an elite group of followers that the this is for. It's for everyone. By this, and what is the this? Help me out. That we love one another. I recently read a blog of a gentleman who only lists his name as Steve. The picture wasn't Steve Worth, though, so it wasn't him. But he just has this new blog, and it's Steve. That's all it says. But profound words that I read just in preparation for this day. Because he was talking about how often, and he was quoting a chaplain of the Coast Guard who had served for some 35 years as a chaplain. So often, he said, we are defined by what we are against. We ought to be defined by what we are for. You might be against that. I might be against that. Maybe a majority of us are against that. But does Jesus say, by that will all people know? By that over there for sure, because that is an essential. That over there is absolutely critical. So don't forget that. Jesus said, by this. Washing people's feet. And remember, I have to remind myself this all the time, so I'm saying it to myself. Remember who was in that lineup to have their feet washed. His betrayer and his denier. I'm sorry, I don't know that I could have done that. I don't know that I could have done that. But Jesus, in his final marching orders, says, by this, what I have just done for you is what you need to do for each other. This, not that, not all those other that's, but this. By this. And what is the this? Help me out. Love one for one another. That you love one another just the way I like to love. What does he say? As I have loved you. Now you go love one another. I know every one of us are saying this, but what about that? What about that? I don't know. Jesus didn't say, here are a couple exception clauses. Here are a couple places where probably you shouldn't try to do this, because it would just be too hard. Jesus said, by this. By this. I met Glenn Frazier, Lieutenant Colonel, retired from the U.S. Army, who served in World War II the same time my father served. And he was also a prisoner of war. Glenn tells me in a nutshell that his life was ruined by his hatred for the Japanese. He said to me, I hated them so much I couldn't even be in relationship with anyone who didn't hate them too. He said it ruined 2 marriages and got me estranged from 3 of my 5 kids. And then one day, a young Japanese woman who was a foreign exchange student at a banquet gave Glenn a gift and got a basin of water and a towel and washed Glenn Frazier's feet. And at the very young age of 80, Glenn's life was transformed because by this, he knew. Not by that, and not by that, but by this. Glenn knew that she was a follower of Christ, and Glenn began to follow Christ. And in his book, Hell's Guest, he tells the story. By this. What is the this? We love one another. You know, again, simple that I am, I cannot forget the words of Billy Graham, who when he was asked, when he was addressing a crowd with 5 living presidents, I don't know if you've ever heard this, but at one of his speaking engagements, right in the front row, most living presidents this country has ever had, 5 of them sitting in the front row. And someone said to Billy Graham, "What do you say?" That's when Tom asked me about doing this. He said, "What do I say to a crowd like this?" You know what Billy Graham's answer was? "Jesus loves me, this I know." Not too complicated. Not a whole lot of that in it, but a lot of this in it. I want you to see this video in closing because it's such a wonderful, horrible example of what I'm talking about. And I say horrible because it makes me say, but what about? What about? What about? I want you to see it, and I'm going to ask you with me to not go there, to think about this as you hear the story of La Mission and what Aaron Dunnigan is doing there. And I want you to hear especially this one quote, if I can find it here. I want you to hear this when this woman speaks. And what she says is, Aaron never needs anybody to be anything other than who they are. Isn't that amazing? I think that's this. And what you'll see, even in this short little video, in the short time she's been down there, and in the testimony of the not church folks, you will hear that God is moving in people's lives, transforming them. Even though the whole time we watch, we go, ooh, but what about that? Watch this. See, part of me still says, but what about that? And yet you have a woman who left church as a child because she couldn't swallow the whole miracle idea, who is now saying, I'd sure like to see one. And a person who thought they would never, ever go to church saying, not only saying they're going, but you heard the evangelist working on the neighbors? Yeah. Let's take just a minute and do this confession in a song, which some of you know, some of you don't. The folks from Downey music team are going to lead you in it, and it's in Spanish. It's very easy in Spanish and English. Let's just do it in just the 2 times. Let's do it in English first, then in Spanish, okay?